Live from Quito, Ecuador, I'm Sweeney Gray and this is From the South, the daily news brief from Tell Us Your English, and we start this new edition right now. We start in Peru, where relatives of those murdered by death squads in the 1990s have been expressing their concern at the pardon granted to the former president Alberto Fujimori. The family members called the decision by President Pedro Pablo Kuczynski a betrayal. Fujimori was serving a 25-year sentence in prison for 2 massacres carried out under his presidency, when thousands more civilians died during the counterinsurgency campaign he oversaw.
It's very painful. What will my son say? I've continued for 25 years looking for justice for Amaro.
There's a betrayal against us. I voted for him. Both times, in the first and second rounds, I voted for him. I believed in him. But as I said, this is the second time that I trusted in a president and that they have failed me.
Our correspondent in Lima, Jaime Herrera, has the latest on what is happening.
Today, the families of the 9 students and 1 teacher of La Cantuta University, killed during Alberto Fujimori's administration, will announce, along with their lawyers, the legal strategy they will put in motion to revoke the pardon that President Pedro Pablo Kuczynski granted to the former president. Social, political, and union organizations will also meet in the afternoon to debate what actions to take regarding this humanitarian pardon, as well as organizing a national strike against the current government's decision. Meanwhile, resignations are adding up inside the governing party, Peruanos por el Cambio, as well as in Congress. Yesterday, several public servants from the Ministry of Justice and Humanitarian Rights, who are against the pardon to Fujimori, especially the director of the programs in charge of searching for missing people and helping the victims, as well as one of the delegates for the Human Rights Division. It's important to remember that President Pedro Pablo Kuczynski had 19 congressmen from his political party in Congress, although 3, Gina Costa, Vicente Caballos, and Alberto de Ballon, have already resigned.
Jaime Herrera with that report. Miguel Ichecolat, the former police chief during the Argentine dictatorship, has been transferred to house arrest after being convicted in 5 cases of crimes against human rights. The court's decision sparked indignation among the families of the victims of the dictatorship, as it was based on Ichecolat's ill health and his advanced age. The judges also determined that the weapons found in the house that he's being transferred to are illegal and must be moved before his sentence begins. Also in Argentina, a federal judge has ruled that the prosecutor, Alberto Nisman, was murdered and did not commit suicide. Nisman was found dead in his apartment in 2015 as he was investigating an alleged cover-up in the attack on a Jewish center in Buenos Aires in the 1980s. The case was used by opponents to try and discredit the then-president, Cristina Fernandez, but her supporters said they were manipulating the judicial process for political ends. Press in Argentina have marched on Congress to stand against the police repression that took place during the pension reform law protests. Photographers and journalists gathered outside Congress in Buenos Aires, holding their cameras and chanting, "Don't shoot the press." They said that during the demonstrations against the pension reform law, 36 photographers, cameramen, and journalists were injured by rubber bullets and tear gas used by security forces to suppress the march. Opposition Alliance has presented a legal action to have the results of November's elections declared null and void. This after the Electoral Authority declared Juan Orlando Hernandez president of the country for a 2nd consecutive term.
The conditions and the reasons to challenge these elections are the amount of irregularities that tainted the election process in Honduras. Experts who analyzed the results of the voting process and the whole world said that the people expressed their will and chose Salvador Nasrallah as their president.
The opposition in Honduras also says it will take to the streets again in the coming days against what it says was electoral fraud.
The Labour Party talked about a day for planning demonstrations against the government of Juan Orlando Hernández.
We're currently regrouping. We have a meeting with some leaders, and afterwards we will call for a national assembly of all of our delegates in order to rethink the strategies we will use to overthrow the dictatorship.
In the meantime, December 26 was the deadline for challenging the election results. The opposition alliance submitted the required legal complaint to the Supreme Electoral Tribunal.
3
people are preparing formal challenges, 2 of them from the opposition alliance and another independent individual who is ready to present an annulment. We are also presenting a complaint since our formal challenge from December the 8th was not answered accordingly.
La impugnación del 8 de diciembre no fue contestada.
To analysts, the political situation in Honduras has become increasingly complex, in particular after re-election were allowed without following legal reforms, establishing the constitution, which only allows re-elections through a national constituent assembly.
We're in political and social crisis caused by the elections. We didn't have the reliability of an honest electoral institution. This was a situation we could see coming from the moment the political class refused to implement the reforms.
The opposition leadership has announced demonstrations will restart in January and will not stop until the demands of establishing a national constituent assembly are fulfilled.
More news in a minute, so stay with us. An environmental evaluation commission is meeting today in Valparaiso, Chile, to decide on the construction of a thermal power station on land that is part of a biosphere reserve. Our correspondent in Santiago, Francisca Castillo, filed this report.
¿Qué tal? Muy buenas tardes y bueno, hoy...
This afternoon in Valparaiso, the Environmental Evolution Commission will meet to outline the future construction of the Los Rolos Thermal Power Station, a highly controversial project that has caused numerous protests throughout the year, particularly by the organized community of indigenous people who hail from the innermost area of Valparaiso. They have strongly rejected the plant's construction, given that it will pollute the area in between Villa Alamana and Limache communes. Various social, indigenous and citizen organizations are gathering this afternoon to show their disapproval during the Commission's meeting and to wait for a decision on their request to invalidate the plant's construction. We will keep you updated on any developments that come from today's meeting and what the final decision of the authorities is on a project that could affect a World Biosphere Reserve.
Ciudadanas y de comunidades indígenas que se encuentran en la zona para manifestar.
The Economic Commission for Latin America and the Caribbean, ECLAC, says that Nicaragua will be the 3rd fastest growing economy in the region in 2018. Our correspondent in Managua went to one of the city's markets to find out why.
With just a few days to go until the end of the year, business is brisk at this popular market in Managua. Traders like Azucena say this is the busy season and they have to take advantage of it.
As traders, we do well when people are doing well because they spend. Sales go up and we get a lot of benefit from that. So we're hoping they keep increasing. Because business was good this Christmas and we're hoping the last days of the year are the same. If the people are all right, then trade is good too.
The Economic Commission for Latin America and the Caribbean is projecting that Nicaragua's economy will grow 5% next year. Other experts also say it will grow, and they say this is because of the good relations the government has developed with all sectors of the economy.
The economy will remain the same this year because of the government policy towards the private sector. Without that, the economy would stagnate.
Ovidio Reyes, president of Nicaragua's central bank, says that in the last 6 years the economy has become stronger, and with the growth in exports this year, expectations are high for 2018.
We have many investment projects to help develop the private sector, and we also have plans to increase our trade with other countries, with new markets in Europe and Asia, which are both very interesting. We also want to improve agricultural and livestock productivity to reach those new markets with quality products.
Nicaragua's national central bank authorities have said that 2017 will end with a growth of 4.7 to 5.2% and an inflation rate of 5 to 6%. They also say they agree with the select predictions for 2018 of growth of 5%.
It's been 18 years since Venezuela suffered its worst natural disaster in modern times. The 1999 Vargas tragedy claimed the lives of thousands. Landslides caused by torrential rains wiped away entire communities. Our correspondent in Caracas, Freddie Gillingham, looks back at that tragic event and went along to the state to see how things are now.
On the surface, Vargas State looks like what you would expect from a coastal region on the Caribbean Sea. Palm trees and a slow, relaxed pace to life. But 18 years ago, the scene here was very, very different. There are no definite figures, but it's estimated that between 10 and 30,000 people lost their lives when a torrent of mud came down the side of the Avila mountain. Thousands of homes were destroyed, and an estimated $3.5 billion worth of damage was caused. Now the Avila mountain still bears the scars of that December back in 1999, and people's accounts of that fateful Christmas are all too vivid.
It was approximately 7 in the evening. It was raining and raining. Then at 9, the electricity went off. We crossed to the other side of the mountain, when suddenly, at 12, the river grew a lot. It took all of the community, which are now in ruins. Apartment buildings with approximately 1,200 families. Many died.
In response to the tragedy, the government set to work on a massive program of sustainable reconstruction. Housing missions have replaced the ruins which once lined this shore. So as you can see, Vargas State has changed a lot since that devastating December some 18 years ago now. The structural redevelopment, which we have been seeing, from Bolivarian housing missions to even a new baseball arena, is clearly evident. This therefore explains why this area remains so strongly loyal to their late leader, Hugo Chavez. From 1998 until now, the state of Vargas has continually voted for mayors loyal to the Bolivarian revolution. These houses may be one of the reasons why. It's a legacy that the older generation want to hand on intact. Freddie Gillingham, Telesur, in Vargas State, Venezuela.
Demonstrations continue in Mexico to demand justice and truth for the forced disappearance of the 43 Ayotzinapa students more than 3 years ago.
The search for truth and justice is what gives strength to the parents of the 43 missing students from Ayotzinapa, who were forcibly disappeared more than 3 years ago. Together, they have faced government institutions that have done very little, they say, to find their children.
We will keep on asking the people and the organizations to stay firm until the end, until we have our students back with us.
At this time of year, one of peace and hope, these parents are walking through the streets of Guerrero and Mexico City to ensure that the forced disappearance of their children is not forgotten.
It's very sad for us. We are away from our communities and our families. All to say to the Mexican government that it's on them to bring with life our children back.
On their way to the Basilica de Guadalupe, the parents expressed their concern about the recently approved interior security law that allows the armed forces to perform public security tasks.
From the beginning, we have pointed out the Mexican army are responsible for the forced disappearance of these young people. In these 3 years, they haven't allowed investigations of the army members that participated in this detention, and we are sure they will keep on committing these kind of crimes.
When parents arrived to Recinto Mariano, elements of the city police prevented them from advancing. With faith and hope, they ask the Virgin Morena to soften the hearts of those governing and handling the investigations.
Politicians are mocking us. Those who are being investigated are running for new public posts, as the most powerful are complicit in this criminal silence.
They remember well the last meeting with federal authorities when they didn't receive any information and the promises of the government came and went unfulfilled.
We continue in Mexico now for a look back at one of the big stories in 2017. In September, the country was devastated by two powerful earthquakes. The first one on the southern coast and the second one 11 days later close to Mexico City. They caused chaos and destruction, but also solidarity and hope across the country. Let's take a look.
On September 19, 2017, a 7.1 earthquake shook Mexico City. It hit only hours after many people participated in earthquake drills on the anniversary of another devastating quake that killed thousands in 1985. The tremor caused apartment blocks, industrial buildings, and highways to crumble, trapping countless people in the wreckage.
The conditions of the building structures are awful. They're really bad. There's no security. We're trying to establish the best security possible. With the help of engineers and the population, we're doing the best job possible.
At least 21 children and 4 adults were buried at the Enrique Rebsamen School. 12 children were saved after uninterrupted hours of searching by local and federal authorities, along with volunteers.
We found people moving under the school. We're not sure whether it's 2 or 3 children, but they're still alive. We detected that there's body heat in that place, and that means we keep digging.
At least 17,000 people were attended to in 48 shelters, but the earthquake left thousands of people homeless.
When the earthquake hit us, we ran out of the house because it started to fall out piece by piece. So it's very risky to stay inside our home, and that is why we are camping outside. We have no other place to go.
The scale of the destruction from the earthquake overwhelmed the Mexican authorities. Ordinary citizens turned out in their thousands to help in the rescue efforts. Citizens joined brigades all across the capital to remove rubble with their bare hands and provide water, food, and shelter.
It's incredible how the population has helped us. They spend their time helping others. They have donated food, water. Sometimes we fall asleep and we wake up with a blanket. We have everything we need thanks to them.
The brigades included people of all ages, rescue experts, rescue dogs, construction workers, and local residents. They organized themselves in their neighborhoods to provide food and emergency supplies in a park in the Mexican capital as the search for survivors continued.
This is my country, isn't it? As brothers, we have to stick together at the very least. This tragedy is proof of that. As Mexicans, we have a love of our country and a love of our own people.
A signal was used by the brigades, the raised fist, which told volunteers in the area to remain silent so that they could hear people trapped under the buildings, houses, and hospitals. Some rescuers felt they needed more time to keep looking for survivors.
I think we should be more flexible with the rescue protocol time limit. We need to think not only about the people trapped inside buildings, but also in their families, who suffer trying to find their missing relatives.
The international help started to arrive. Brigades from El Salvador, Nicaragua, Ecuador, France, and other countries were sent to Mexico to assist in relief efforts. Venezuela delivered a cargo plane with more than 10 tons of humanitarian aid to earthquake-ravaged Mexico City. A couple of days after this tragic event, Mexican and international artists performed at a free concert in the Zocalo of Mexico City, which brought together 300,000 people with the intention of raising funds to provide assistance to victims and help rebuild devastated areas.
We have to keep supporting, cooperating, donating, whatever. What is little for you, for us, is going to be a lot, and we'll be able to rebuild Mexico and help those families that need it.
I want to ask for a big applause today for all the people who gave a hand, for the rescuers, for those who helped in some way, for all our heroes, a strong applause for each one of us.
President Enrique Peña Nieto offered a ceremony to pay tribute to the victims and thank the groups that took part in the rescue efforts.
We have felt the solidarity support of thousands of people, of volunteers who, along with the government organizations, were ready and willing to help, regardless of the hours dedicated to this work and without rest.
The earthquake left 470 people dead, 184,000 households, 175 health facilities, and 16,000 schools damaged. It is estimated that more than $2.5 billion will be needed to pay for reconstruction. More than 2 months later, the efforts to rebuild and make structural evaluation of damaged buildings seem never-ending. Thousands of people in Mexico City were still waiting for their homes to be rebuilt as the Mexican government promised.
The government is not doing what it should. They are avoiding their responsibility. Of course, it was nature that affected us, but the government is not providing any real help.
In November, the earthquake victims marched throughout the streets of Mexico City. Thousands of families who were left homeless after the earthquake and were still living in temporary shelters. They decided to keep protesting until their concerns are heard by the government.
Until our houses are reconstructed, until we get a decent home, we will remain here, protesting and closing streets.
This situation is a disgrace for us, but there's also other people who helped us. With that support from the world, we have enough for reconstructions.
Social organizations denounced that the government and political parties think only of the presidential elections of 2018, while the more than 250,000 people affected throughout the country have still not received an answer to their demands for transparency in the use of resources. So again, they raised their fist high, the sign of hope that today is transformed into a sign of the fight of the victims.
And with that, we'll be back very soon, so stay with us. Dozens of Palestinians have scuffled with Israeli security forces across the West Bank amid ongoing protests against Washington's recognition of Jerusalem as Israel's capital. In Bethlehem, Israeli security forces fired tear gas at rock-throwing Palestinian youth, and in Nablus, forces scuffled with protesters who approached them. However, no casualties have been reported. Israeli security forces have arrested human rights defender Amira, head of the Popular Struggle Coordination Committee, or the PSCC, during a march in Bethlehem. The Solidarity March called for the release of arrested teenager Ahed Timimi and her mother Nariman, who recently had their detention period extended. Soldiers fired tear gas at protesters who flung rocks as the demonstration turned violent. The Guatemalan government has been defending its decision to move its embassy in Israel to Jerusalem. Guatemala and Honduras were the only two countries apart from a number of Pacific Island states to support President Donald Trump's decision on Jerusalem at a United Nations debate last week.
There is no possibility of reversing it. What are the pressures? I didn't have any pressure on this issue. Honestly, I return and I repeat that it is a foreign policy decision. It is a sovereign decision of the state of Guatemala. And it is coherent with the relationship that Guatemala has had with Israel during the 70 years of the establishment of the state of Israel. I state again that this is the friendly relationship we have had with the state of Israel, and we are only being coherent.
Aid workers have begun evacuating emergency medical cases from Syria's besieged opposition stronghold in eastern Ghouta. 3 children were among the first 4 patients to be evacuated. In total, there are 29 seriously ill people who need immediate medical help. The evacuees suffer from diseases like cancer, kidney infection, hemophilia, and others. After months of deadlock, a deal was agreed to late on Tuesday between the Syrian government and a rebel faction to allow the Red Cross to evacuate. And at least 30 people have been killed and 60 others are missing as a mudslide ravaged the Tiyuga village in the Philippines following a tropical storm. Survivors said they heard a loud roar and described the mudslide as a monster with 20 engines. Tugaya village is located in the south and is one of the most remote areas of the country. Floods and mudslides there have left over 300 dead or missing, according to government authorities. Thousands are protesting in Morocco after 2 brothers died while digging in an abandoned mine in the northeastern city of Gerarda. The 2 brothers, 22 and 30, hit a water well, flooding the tunnel they were digging in. Protesters are calling the coal mines the mines of death, in which hundreds of people risk their lives every day in hazardous, abandoned coal pits to earn a minimal income.
With a friend, we dug this well for a year. With a hammer and the pickaxe, we arrived at 26 meters. It cost us 40,000 dirhams, and now we have found some water. It's the same water that killed those 2.
An Australian woman has escaped a death sentence after being acquitted of drug trafficking by a Malaysian court. Maria Elvira Pinto Esposto was accused of drug trafficking after authorities found methamphetamine in her bag. Under Malaysian law, anyone found guilty of possessing more than 50 grams of illegal drugs faces the death penalty. However, Esposto's lawyers have argued that she was persuaded into carrying a bag containing drugs unknowingly by a friend. The detention of 2 Reuters journalists in Myanmar has been extended for 2 more weeks, announced in their first public appearance since December 12th. They face up to 14 years in jail under the Official Secrets Act for allegedly possessing documents related to the army crackdown in Rakhine State. At least 11 journalists have been arrested in Myanmar in 2017. Protesters in Kosovo have hung hundreds of neckties on the fence of a government building after the president gave himself a raise for wardrobe expenses. The Prime Minister Ramush Haradinaj announced that he was going to double his salary of 1,300 euros a month, arguing in a statement on television that he needed the money to buy clothes. The statement went viral and inspired the creative protests. More than 75,000 villagers have been evacuated after Mount Sinabung in Indonesia erupted for the 2nd time in December, spewing plumes of ash more than 2 kilometers in the air. Villagers were warned to stay at least 7 kilometers away from the area. Authorities are worried that lava flows could destroy homes and that Bali's Mount Agung could also explode. Mount Sinabung is the most active of the country's 130 active volcanoes. Earlier this year, 10 people died in another explosion. And we've come to the end of this news brief. For these and many other stories, you can go to our website, tellusyourtv.net/English. And join us on social media, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. For Tell Us Your English, I am Soini Gray. Thank you so much for watching.